Shiro sometimes worried if people could hear the sultry voice coming out of his headphones. They were expensive and specifically designed not to be heard, but Shiro worried anyway. Go lower. You're working so hard. I love it when you lift weights for me. Let me see your muscles. It was a fight not to flush, the voice both distracting and edging him on as he pumped his arms and lifted the bar over his chest. Ever since Shiro had found the blog, his workouts had become increasingly toasty. Originally, he had been on the lookout for something to help him sleep. The first ever audio he had listened to on BlueVoice's blog had actually been for soothing anxiety, and had helped him get the best night of sleep he'd had in months. Shiro had to admit he'd been a little bit in love with BlueVoice right away, in the sweet way he had reminded Shiro that everything was all right, that he would stay with him until he fell asleep and be there in the morning. Shiro listened to the audio every night for a week before he managed to get the courage to click on the little NSFW button on the blog menu. It had been calling his name since night 1. It had surprised him when the link had taken him to another page of links, each carefully labeled and detailed. Shiro's eyes had run over one link in particular, scratching over it like a broken record and unable to get away. He had flushed at even the suggestion of BlueVoice as his sub, calling him Sir or... Shiro gulped as he read the description again, noticing the disclaimer at the end. Love to hear me beg? Sub-audios might be right for you. Sub-audios are generally generic, meaning my own voice, if you're into that kind of thing. Sub-audios might occasionally include DDLB. You have been warned. The impulse to click had been strong. It was something he had thought about, often, but he'd never had the courage to bring it up with a partner, and it had been fine. But this... It wasn't like this was hurting anyone. With barely their resolve, Shiro had managed to scroll away and down to suggestive workout motivation. He had been surprised to find an entire playlist, some for lifting, for running, for just general motivation. Which was how he found himself here, doing bicep curls in the weight room, BlueVoice crooning at him. Keep going, baby. You're so strong. I bet you could pick me up with all those muscles. I bet you put them to good use, don't you, baby? Shiro snorted. Not recently, he hadn't. The only good thing he had put anything to recently was his hand, and his headphones, listening to every audio on BlueVoice's blog, except for the ones he really wanted to. Racking his weights, Shiro perked up at the familiar ping from his Patreon. BlueVoice was the only creator he supported on there, so it meant either an update or new audio. It was maybe a little pathetic that Shiro was a top patron, but it wasn't that expensive. And he got exclusive audios and life updates, and, well, he tried not to think about it too much. Shiro unlocked his phone, moving a little to get out of the way of another gym-goer without looking up. It was a new audio, but Shiro's mind had completely blanked at the title. Baby Blue motivates Daddy to work hard. Over a month later, Shiro still hadn't worked himself up to clicking on the sub-audios. He had listened to everything else under the sun. BlueVoice's guided masturbations were a nightly favorite, and the only thing keeping Shiro from falling under. Baby Blue motivates his daddy during a workout by promising a reward when he's done. Spoiler, the reward is his ass. I don't normally combine motivation and kinks like this, but I received a lot of requests for something like this, so here it is. I queued this one so I wouldn't obsessively check feedback right away. Let me know what you all think. Contains suggestive talk, fingering, finger-sucking, and, obviously, daddy kink. Shiro's finger was hovering over the play button, his common sense and dick at war with each other. He knew, logically, that the first time he listened to a BlueVoice audio like that, it absolutely should not be in public. But his dick was telling him not to worry. It was a workout audio, after all. He was supposed to listen to it while working out. Glancing surreptitiously around the room, Shiro winced when he realized who else was in there. Of course, it was that guy. That guy, meaning the tall, lithe guy who stretched like an acrobat after he ran and did pull-ups with surprisingly strong arms, and had maybe featured in a couple of Shiro's fantasies in his pre-BlueVoice days. And even now, if he was being completely honest. Shiro genuinely, honestly needed to get laid. This was all getting out of hand. He pressed play anyway. Oh, Daddy? Are you working out? Can I watch? I promised to be a good boy. Lance groaned in exasperation as he pulled his beat-up VW Bug into the gym parking lot. Hot Guy's truck was in the parking lot, meaning Hot Guy was in the gym right now. It was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, Lance's cardio always went by so fast because he was constantly distracted. Watching Hot Guy do push-ups in the corner of his eye, or if he was really lucky, reflected in the mirror in front of the treadmill with his ass on full display. On the other hand, running with a boner was not exactly ideal, and Lance would prefer to never do it again. He spotted Hot Guy immediately, standing right at the entrance of the weight room, right where Lance needed to be. Lance cringed as he walked over, sliding behind him and over to the other side of the room to load the Smith machine for squats. It was impossible not to watch Hot Guy from the corner of his eye. Lance had left his headphones with his keys in some vain attempt to invite the other guy into talking to him without actually initiating anything on his part. Lance honestly didn't know what was wrong with him. Normally he could talk to anyone, could charm anyone, but something about this guy, the way he smoothed his little white tuft of hair back over his head when he sweat, the way he just looked so intense when he worked, it drove Lance wild and made him just a smidge timid. This was the first time Lance had completely forgone his headphones, so he was surprised to hear sound coming out of the other guy's. It was even more surprising that the sound was familiar, even if he couldn't quite place it. Daddy, you look so good! Just a few more, and you can have me all you want. Lance nearly dropped the bar from his shoulders. That was his voice. That was the audio he had cued to drop today. That was Hot Guy, listening to Lance whimper and moan and beg Daddy to hurry with his workout because he was lonely. Slowly, Lance racked the bar, eyes flickering between the mirror and the Hot Guy who was still pumping the weights. He could see how wide his own eyes were, reflected back at him. He couldn't be. You look so good, Daddy. Please, please get over here and fuck me. I need you. Except it totally was him. Lance was paralyzed. What should he do? Should he say something? Like what? Hey, that's me you're listening to. Want to hear the real thing? Yeah, right. As much as Lance really wanted that guy to fuck him, especially now that he knew what direction his taste went, that wasn't something Lance could ever picture himself saying. It was a relief when Hot Guy finally re-racked his weights and left, leaving Lance half dead in his wake and trying not to imagine him bending Lance over one of the benches and taking him apart. Shiro could feel eyes on him as he worked. He knew, logically, that there was no way someone could hear what he was listening to, but it still felt dangerous. Like maybe he was wrong. Or maybe the other guy had noticed that Shiro was starting to chub up in his sweatpants and was wondering what was wrong with him. He resolved to finish his set, if only not to draw attention to himself, before scuttling out of the weight room and out of the gym. The audio finished just as he was walking out the door. Thank you, Daddy. I loved it. Shiro made a big show of not listening to any of BlueVoice's audios that night to punish himself. He normally listened to new audios a couple times the first day, but he needed to have some restraint. He ate his dinner and pointedly ignored his phone and computer and watched perfectly mind-numbing television and didn't think about what he could be doing instead. It really hit Shiro that maybe he had a problem when he automatically reached for his phone and headphones as he turned the lights out for bed, intending to put on one of BlueVoice's nighttime audios. I'm so fucked, Shiro groaned, setting his phone aside. He spent the night tossing and turning and ended up going to the gym super early because if he was awake, he may as well be doing something. To his surprise, the guy from yesterday was there already. His cheeks were flushed an enticing shade of pink, and Shiro was struck by how good exertion looked on some people. It was something he was always attracted to, the glow some people got after working out, the way their skin would get all dewy and gorgeous, and this guy was the perfect embodiment of that. It was a good thing Shiro had decided to take a break from using BlueVoice's audios at the gym. He didn't need a repeat performance of yesterday, and the way the guy was looking at him certainly wouldn't have helped. Lance still hadn't decided what he was going to do about this. Briefly he considered ignoring it, but the idea was quickly scrapped. There was no way Lance could go back to normal and not remember the way Hot Guy had looked, eyes glazed a little as he listened to Lance beg to be fucked. There was no conscious decision that led to Lance standing in front of the other guy's treadmill, peering up at him with a smile after getting his attention. Hi, I'm Lance. Lance smiled and offered a tentative wave. The Hot Guy looked caught off guard, a smile automatically coming to his lips. Hi, I'm Shiro. Shiro reached out across the console of the machine to awkwardly shake Lance's hand as he walked. I just wanted to introduce myself. Lance winced at how uncertain he sounded, but Shiro smiled a little brighter. "Oh, well, hi. It's nice to meet you." Shiro grinned, seemingly genuinely pleased that Lance had made the effort. Lance shifted uncomfortably, waiting for something, but not knowing exactly what. He had no game plan, and no way to bring this up other than awkwardly blurting it out. "Is there something I can help you with?" Biting his lip, Lance looked away, then back at Shiro. Shiro had stopped at the treadmill, a look of concern and trepidation starting to draw lines on his forehead. Lance could only see one plan of action at this point, and that was just to say fuck it. "I heard what you were listening to yesterday." Shiro blanched, his eyes wide as his prosthetic hand flew to his mouth in surprise. "Oh." Lance nodded, trying to find the words for the next part of his confession. Are you going to have me kicked out?" Bewildered, Lance finally looked Shiro in the eye and was surprised to see anxiety there. Why would... It suddenly occurred to Lance what he had accused Shiro of. Lance threw his hands up, startling Shiro into taking a step back. "What? No, Fuck!" Lance ran his hands through his hair, ruffling the curls as Shiro stepped off the treadmill so they were on even ground. "I just meant that was me, on the audio. I'm BlueVoice." Lance's voice had grown steadily softer until he had finally whispered his username. "What?" Shiro sounded just as faint, his eyes roaming over Lance's face and body, as if trying to form a puzzle that just wouldn't fit. "I'm BlueVoice. The person you were listening to is me." Shiro couldn't think of what to say. Lance's blue eyes were wide as he fidgeted uncomfortably. He was everything Shiro had pictured him as, likely because Shiro had pictured BlueVoice's words coming out of Lance's mouth a number of times under the shield of his sheets. "You recorded those?" "You recorded those?" It was a rhetorical question, really, but Lance nodded anyway. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and seemed to be having difficulty making eye contact now. "And you heard me listening to you, begging to be fucked by Daddy." There was no one else in the gym this early, but they both quickly looked around as Shiro realized what he had said. "Yes," Lance conceded. Shiro took a deep breath, trying to relax the rapid beating of his heart and speak past the knot in his throat. "Oh." If anything, Lance looked just as uncomfortable as he felt. He fidgeted with the bottom of his tank top, and some traitorous part of Shiro's mind was still cataloging how gorgeous he looked even now. "I just thought you should know. I'm not upset or anything." Lance looked up, eyes wide, like maybe Shiro thought he was accusing him of something again. "I mean, how could I be? I'm the one that put the audios out there." Licking his lips self-consciously, Lance looked as if he was making a very concentrated study of the ceiling as he spoke. "You just, may want to turn the volume down. On your headphones, I mean." This was clearly an attempt at humor in what was the most awkward situation of Shiro's life. He wanted to laugh and let Lance off the hook, let himself off the hook, but all he could manage was a strangled, "Right." The conversation seemingly at an end, Lance wandered away to one of the stationary bikes, both of their faces still burning. Shiro turned back to the treadmill and started it again, already having forgotten he warmed up already considering how out of control he felt. Was he really just going to let this go? He had met BlueVoice, and BlueVoice was Lance, and Lance was the incredibly cute guy from the gym, and Shiro was just going to let him ride a stationary bike for a few minutes and then leave. They would probably exchange awkward glances for a few days, maybe even weeks, but then they would never speak again. Shiro would probably never be able to listen to a BlueVoice audio without feeling sick. Shiro stopped at the treadmill again, this time hopping off before the belt had finished moving. There was no way to do this without being incredibly weird, but there was no way he could not do this and live with himself or ever return to the gym again. Shiro walked briskly over to Lance, determined to see this through as Lance gave him a confused, expectant look as he slowed his pedaling. "Is there a non-creepy way for me to ask you on a date?" What?" Lance looked startled, his feet stopping altogether in the pedals in surprise. "I know it's probably so weird. You know I get off on you calling me Daddy, and I just learned your name, but could I take you on a date?" Shiro could feel he was blushing now, but forced himself to look Lance in the eye. I've always thought you were cute, and if I don't ask you now, I never will," Shiro confided as Lance continued to simply stare in wide-eyed bewilderment. Um, okay," Lance squeaked as Shiro gave him a relieved, if not incredibly surprised, smile. "Really? Tonight?" Lance only nodded, dumbfounded. There was no way he could finish working out, and ended up just leaving after letting Shiro type his number into his phone and sending him an awkward little wave on his way out the door. Another gym-goer walked in right around the same time Shiro was considering just slumping to the floor. Instead, he finally gave up on his warm-up and went to the weights with a vague wish not to be so distracted he hurt himself before tonight. Lance wasn't entirely sure what he had agreed to. Shiro was hot, that much was true, and seemed genuinely sweet and caring and apparently really liked Lance, or at least his voice. But Lance had also never considered the possibility that he would actually run into someone who listened to his audios, let alone go on a date with them. "Are you sure this is safe? What if he's some kind of creepy stalker?" Hunk was sitting cross-legged on Lance's bed, concern evident in his voice as he watched Lance pick up and discard outfit after outfit in preparation for his date. "If he was a stalker, he would have approached me first," Lance responded easily, and not because this was a line of reasoning he had already followed to its full and complete anxiety-inducing end. To his credit, Shiro had seemed just as flustered and embarrassed as Lance had been. It was that genuine look of shock and dismay that Lance was holding on to as his defense against the "What the fuck are you doing?" voice shouting in his head. "What about this?" Hunk only raised an eyebrow before giving it a final thumbs up. "At least it's not a crop top." Lance gave him the finger before turning his back on him and searching for some pants. He didn't wear crop tops on the first date anyway. Despite Hunk's comment, it really was a pretty conservative outfit for Lance. He liked the bulk of the sweater, though, and the collarless button-up shirt was soft and comforting, and Lance honestly needed all the comfort he could get. Shiro really was his type, but Shiro also knew a lot more about him than he knew about Shiro. He looked once more in the mirror to confirm he had no flying buggers or out-of-control cowlicks before meeting Hunk's disapproving gaze once again. "All right, Mom, you have the address of the restaurant, so if I'm not back by bedtime, come storm the place." "I will," Hunk sniffed, as Lance finally walked out the door. Shiro was 10 minutes early, standing outside the little Italian place and kicking gravel while he waited. He worried the Henley he was wearing was too casual, that his jeans were really too casual. This was probably a bad idea, except for how he knew he would end up kicking himself if he walked away right now. When Lance's cab pulled up, most of Shiro's anxieties faded away when he saw him step out. Lance really was gorgeous, all long limbs even as he tripped a little getting out of the car. Moving on instinct, Shiro darted forward and caught Lance's arm, pulling him to the curb and close to his chest. "Ah, thank you," Lance squeaked, a surprised noise Shiro was starting to hope he would become familiar with over time. They stood there for an awkward moment as Lance waited for Shiro to release him and Shiro struggled to make his hands drop so Lance could step away. Should we go in?" Shiro cleared his throat, embarrassed by the break in his voice. It made Lance smile, though, and reach a tentative hand out to lace his fingers with Shiro's warm flesh hand. They spent most of the date making light small talk, and it was good, better than good, really, until Lance suddenly stopped and looked Shiro dead in the eye. "I have a deal-breaker question for you." Shiro instinctively wanted to shrink back. He had been waiting for this, some kind of reference to how long he had been listening to BlueVoice, or was he a creepy stalker question? "You know that guy in the gym? The short one with the baseball cap who takes up way too much space in the stretching area?" Lance asked, still deadly serious. Yeah?" Shiro was nonplussed. "Do you also think he must bathe in his cologne before coming in, or is it just me?" "Oh my gosh, yes. Every time he walks by, I feel like I'm going to choke." Shiro laughed, relieved to see Lance's face break out into a brilliant smile. "It's just way too much. It's like he's afraid to smell like sweat, but it's a gym. We all smell like sweat." Lance banged his head lightly on the table in mock frustration. Shiro was still laughing in little helpless hiccups when Lance peeked up from where his cheek was now resting against the table. When Shiro finally managed to calm down, they were both still smiling, and something warm had settled around them. Resting his head in his hand, Shiro watched Lance finally sit back up and finish eating. "I'm really glad that you agreed to come out with me tonight," Shiro confided, scraping his fork along the bottom of his empty plate in an aimless pattern. "I'm really glad you get off to my voice, apparently," Lance blurted out, then shrieked when Shiro spit out the giant gulp of water he had just taken. "I am so sorry. I don't know why I said that." Lance frantically tried to dry the tabletop with his napkin as Shiro continued to choke on the other side of the table. They were both red-faced and embarrassed when the waiter came over with extra napkins to help them clean up the spill. "We'll, take our check now," Shiro told her, not looking Lance in the eye. "I am really sorry," Lance apologized again, his heart sinking at the realization that he had probably ruined their entire date at the last second. "I didn't originally go looking for that." Shiro was staring at a space just past Lance's ear as he spoke. "I was actually looking for something to help me get to sleep." "Oh!" It genuinely hadn't occurred to Lance that that might be the case. He knew a lot of people liked those audios, but more people tended to like the dirtier ones, and he wasn't under any kind of illusion about what sort of blog he ran. "I listened to your relaxation ones every night for a week before I could work up the courage to listen to anything else." Lance imagined a nervous Shiro glancing around his empty apartment before pulling up the audio list. It made something tender and silly blossom in his chest as he continued to listen to Shiro explain. "That day, at the gym, that was the first time I'd ever listened to a sub-audio." Shiro looked pained as he spoke, his gaze now somewhere around Lance's collarbone. "Is that something you like?" Lance asked, genuinely curious. He got a lot of asks from people telling him how they used his audios to explore kinks on their own. Maybe Shiro was just doing that and hadn't liked it, or thought it was too awkward. Shiro seemed to steel himself before responding. Yes, I do. Yes, I do." Lance wouldn't pretend he wasn't a little relieved. He had already spent the afternoon repressing thoughts of Shiro taking him home after their date, bending him over, commanding him to spread his legs and not to move. The waiter came back then, placing their bill on the table and smiling to herself when they both reached for it. "But I asked you," Lance protested, trying to tug the little folder from Shiro's stupidly strong grip. Shiro smirked as he easily shook Lance's hands off of his and pulled his wallet and credit card out. "Do me a favor and keep saving up for that new mic, huh?" Shiro murmured absently as he waved to their waiter. "Wow." "What?" Shiro looked confused as the waiter walked away and his full attention came back to Lance. "You really do subscribe to me." Lance laughed a little in disbelief, and then a new thought occurred to him. "Are you a patron on Patreon?" Shiro's embarrassed cough was enough to answer that. "What tier?" Lance leaned forward eagerly. "Lance! Come on!" For some reason this was important to Lance, as if it was some kind of judge of how much Shiro liked him. $50. "That's you?" I couldn't believe when someone actually bought that tier. That was wish fulfillment only. Lance yelped, reaching out blindly for Shiro's hands as if to steady himself. "Yeah, well..." Shiro looked about ready to self-combust. Lance felt about ready to self-combust. But he was still holding on to Shiro's prosthetic hand when the waiter came back, and Shiro made no move to shake him off, choosing to awkwardly maneuver his card back into his wallet one-handed. Lance felt sheepish as they stood, and he became increasingly aware that he would now have to let go of Shiro's hand. It surprised him when Shiro simply reached over and transferred his hand to his fleshed hand so they could walk comfortably side by side out the door. They walked to the parking lot where Shiro's truck was parked. "Why didn't you bring your car?" Shiro asked, still holding on to Lance's hand, making no move to let go just yet. "My roommate's idea. He figured it would be harder to follow me home if you were some creeper if I had a cab driver with me." Shiro spluttered, but couldn't deny the logic. Lance swung their joined hands between them even as he turned to face him. "Do you want me to drive you home?" Shiro offered, and Lance had no doubt he meant it in an entirely chaste and gentlemanly way. "Do you want to come up to my room when we get there?" Shiro had expected more spluttering, another shy blush, and maybe an adorable, awkward fidget. Shiro squeezed his hands instead, something sharp and calculating forming in his eyes. Lance stumbled when Shiro tugged on their hands, pulling him so he was forced to brace against Shiro's chest. "Depends. Are you going to be a good boy for me when we get there?" Any idea of teasing Shiro fled Lance's mind as an uncontrolled whimper slipped between his lips. Yes, I'll be good. Shiro let him go, smiling slightly as he ruffled Lance's hair before opening the door to the cab of the truck for him. After you. Lance spent the whole ride home wondering what he had gotten himself into, even as his hand rested high on Shiro's thigh as he drove. They ended up having to sneak past a dozing hunk, his body stretched out on the couch while infomercials for hair removal played on the screen. Lance pressed a finger to his lips to signal for Shiro to be quiet as they moved through the room and down the hall to Lance's bedroom. He's a pretty heavy sleeper, but still. Lance suddenly felt a little awkward. He hadn't actually expected to invite Shiro up, so the room was kind of a mess and the bed hadn't been made. Shiro was probably wondering what he was doing here. Shiro placed a hand on his wrist, breaking Lance from his fruitless thought spiral. Can I kiss you? Lance took in a shuddering breath and nodded. Please? The kiss was soft at first, dry, chaste, and it was easy to let Shiro take the lead from there. Lance opened his mouth willingly at the feeling of Shiro's tongue against his lips. The kiss turned sloppy from there, Shiro licking into his mouth, tilting Lance's head back, demanding obedience already. Is this okay? Shiro mouthed along Lance's throat, one hand squeezing his jaw, the other at Lance's hip. Yes, 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 Lance chanted, whining a little as Shiro's hand squeezed tighter, and he felt the barest pressure of teeth against his skin. Do you want to know why I never listened to your sub-audios before that day? Shiro sounded way too conversational in Lance's opinion, but he was completely incapable of forming words as Shiro cupped the front of his jeans. It's because I knew I wouldn't be able to handle it. What? Lance gasped, trying to follow the line of conversation even as Shiro unbuttoned his pants and pushed them down around his thighs, briefs and all. I wanted you to call me Daddy so badly. The idea that someone else was hearing it too. That you were calling someone else Daddy, thinking of someone other than me. Shiro snarled, biting harshly into Lance's neck, just soft enough not to break the skin. Fuck! Shiro pulled back, hands pushing Lance's sweater off his shoulders before pausing at the hem of his shirt. Is that too much? He didn't look unsure when he asked, like Lance thought he might have been at the beginning of the night. Shiro was just checking in, making sure Lance was comfortable, that he was enjoying this. It made Lance a little weak in the knees, the easy way Shiro took to taking care of him. Yes, good, green, completely green. Lance wasn't sure if Shiro knew the terms, but he seemed to get the idea as he started to help Lance out of his shirt before he was entirely done speaking. Lance shoved at his pants, kicking off his shoes and trying to wiggle out of the restricting clothing with about as much grace as could be expected with his cock leaking against his stomach and Shiro's eyes on him. Shiro laughed, reaching out to steady him as Lance tugged his socks off and nearly fell forward onto Shiro's chest. Easy, baby, easy. We have all night, Shiro hummed, running his hands through Lance's hair as he straightened up. Go get on the bed. It wasn't a question, and Lance wasn't in the business of disobeying, at least not tonight. He scrambled to follow orders, crawling up the bed and gasping at the feeling of Shiro's hands on his hips, pulling his ass high in the air. Tell me what you want. Lance debated, with a few brain cells still functioning at this point, if he should do it. Shiro had practically given him an engraved invitation and everything, but a direct command, and he wanted so badly. Daddy, please? The sharp inhale from behind was all Lance needed to know he had made the right choice. He leaned forward on his elbows, tilting his hips and spreading his knees to show off. Tell Daddy what you want, baby. Shiro ran his hands up the curve of Lance's ass, the contrast in temperature sending Lance's thoughts skittering just as much as the way they dug into the skin and pulled his cheeks apart. Daddy, please fuck me, Lance whined, pushing back into Shiro's hold and reveling at the groan he received in return for his plea. Anything you want, baby boy. A press of lips, soft and dry against his hole, had Lance keening, scrabbling at the pillows beneath his head even before Shiro truly began. Shiro teased him, licking long, flat strokes over and over, pausing in between to barely dip his tongue inside. Daddy, don't tease me. Lance held his breath, waiting for a spanking or reprimand for backtalk, but Shiro only laughed. What do you mean, baby boy? I'm not teasing you. You wanted me to fuck you, so I'm fucking you with my tongue. If Lance had been capable of thought, he would have wondered where the shy, sweet man from dinner was. Instead, all he could do was whimper and whine as Shiro continued at his task to completely destroy him. Fuck me with your cock! I need your cock! Shiro pulled back, humming as he ran soothing hands up and down the curve of Lance's shaking back. Oh, is that what you wanted? It took several tries for Lance to reach into his bedside table and find the lube and condoms. Shiro was patient enough, though, squeezing finger-shaped bruises onto Lance's ass and thighs as he waited. Shiro murmured nonsense words as he heated the lube in his palms before trailing one slick finger around Lance's rim. You're so good for me. So pretty, such a good boy. Lance could hear himself whining at the praise, nearly incoherent with how good it felt to hear. It didn't take long before Shiro added another finger, and then a third, scissoring him open and pulling delicately on Lance's rim just so he would moan loud and long. You're going to take me so well, aren't you, baby boy? There was the sound of shuffling as Shiro searched one-handed for the condom that had fallen into the tangle of sheets. When Shiro pulled his fingers free, Lance cried out, the empty feeling suddenly overwhelming him with need. It's okay. You're okay. Shiro pressed butterfly kisses along his spine, hovering close enough to comfort him so that his knuckles wrapped Lance's ass as he slipped the condom on. Shiro had considered teasing Lance a little more, making him beg until he cried. But then Lance turned his head, and tears were already starting to form at the corner of his eyes, and Shiro was entirely 100% lost. I've got you, baby boy, Shiro hummed, pressing inside as slow as he could, wanting Lance to feel every centimeter, wanting to savor it. Daddy, Lance sighed, his body doing its best to try and pull him in, hips tilting, back arching just to get Shiro to move a little faster, to slip in a little further. Shiro bottomed out, balls resting against the smooth skin of Lance's ass. He was struck by how different Lance sounded. He knew, logically, that BlueVoice never literally masturbated for his audio, but Shiro had always assumed that the noises he made were close, if not the same, as the ones he made in real life. But these punched-out little breaths, the way Lance couldn't seem to stop himself from whining, from whispering daddy under his breath as Shiro fucked him slow and deep, this was so much better than any audio or Shiro's imagination. The reality of it all hit Shiro like a punch, his thrusts turning hard and erratic as he aimed for Lance's prostate to get him as close to the edge as Shiro already was. Can you come for me, Lance, baby? Lance's moans turned high and breathy in his throat as he came. He clenched down around Shiro, hard enough to edge his vision into black as he followed suit. Lance was shivering when Shiro finally pulled out, hovering over him. Shiro tried to stay close, a knee against Lance's thigh, a hand on his back, some kind of skin touching skin as he disposed of the condom and reached for the tissue box on the nightstand. Unthinkingly, Shiro continued to murmur praise as he cleaned them both off as best as he could. You did so well for me. Such a good boy for me. Thank you, Lance. You did so good. So good. He curled together after that, Shiro holding Lance as tight as was comfortable until his violent shaking slowed and stopped altogether. Are you okay? Shiro kissed his temple and waited as Lance cleared his throat and searched for his voice. Yeah, sometimes after a really good orgasm, I just feel like I'm freezing to death. Lance shrugged, curling closer to Shiro even though he was feeling a lot better. He was grateful when Shiro just shifted them so more of their skin pressed together, still holding him as tight as he could. He stayed like that for a while, just breathing, listening to the sound of the TV in the living room that had mysteriously gotten louder since when they first arrived. You aren't a stalker, are you? The question was so sudden, Shiro couldn't help but laugh, a big, boisterous noise that shook them both and the bed. No, I don't think so. Although I would like to take you on another date soon, if that's okay. Lance smiled and tilted his head so he could kiss Shiro's nearest peck. Yeah, that works for me. Shiro ended up staying the night. They had breakfast together way too early, and Lance rode with him over to his apartment so he could get his gym gear and they could work out together. They were holding hands when they walked in, and Lance was so focused on whether he could steal a kiss before his run, he nearly jumped out of his skin at the sudden voice yelling in his back. Fucking finally! I was so sick of you whining about that cute guy at the gym. Lance looked around and spotted someone he recognized as one of Shiro's friends from seeing them work out together, but he didn't know his name. Lance, this is my best friend, Keith. Keith, this is Lance. Shiro waved his free hand between them, his prosthetic still clutched in Lance's hold. Nice to meet you. Maybe you can get him to stop listening to that porn blog so loudly everyone in the gym can hear it. Lance could only cackle as Shiro tried to pull away and hide behind one of the machines, but Lance wouldn't let go. Don't worry, I'll see what I can do.